Um, but the more I thought about it, I realized that death is a mindset about life. It's really about how you relate to the universe. Is it for you or against you? I saw it as a choice about victimization or empowerment. You know, you're going to die, so are you thinking about the time that you have, which is a gift, or are you thinking about that moment that you exit? There's a word in Italian, it's gonfiore. Gonfiore is perfect in explaining sculpture and the fullness of really amazing, awesome sculpture. Gonfio means full, and it's full like a balloon. Fiore is flower. I mean, it's perfect, gonfiore. This is what good modeling is. When I sculpt, and let's go look at this model. I thought, you know, we'd liven things up a little bit. When I sculpt, I diagram each form. The body is thought of as only being full of convexities. Expansive state of mind, right? There are no concavities. It's a form of perception. You actually create a belief. There's a belief system that when you think something, it actually appears there in front of you. And the more you think about it, the more it appears. So I use anatomy and design, which are based upon conventions that come out of the Renaissance. And these deal with how you put the figure together in a systematic fashion. So I have models that I get off Craigslist. This is Mark. Mark is from Frog's Neck. It's an amazing model. But the interesting concept here is that I work from real people. I'm not inventing this. So I'm going to go back to this a little bit, and I picked two very, very divergent sculptures. One, I stuck this in because this really shows the traditional concept of death. You never show somebody lying dead on the floor. You have the dying Gaul, right? But he's not lying dead on the floor. The way that it's usually expressed in sculpture is gravity pushes down the figure, and you have the sense of a struggle against something. It's not prostrate there, dead on the ground. So I picked two pieces. Let's go to the next one, please. Dead Dad. Very strange, isn't it? To me, it's very strange. Let's look at the, and then I'm going to compare Dead Dad to, Peter, if you can, please, the next, the Pietà, and this is a detail, and then let's look at the larger one. And I really went, I mean, these are the opposite ends of the spectrum, right? Okay. Michelangelo needs little introduction, right? Let's go to Ron Muke. Ron Muke is a contemporary sculptor out of London. His training is as a model maker or a puppeteer for children's television. In '96, he transitioned to fine art as a sculptor. I don't know if you remember, he had a big show at the Brooklyn Museum a few years ago. Usually he does oversized sculptures that are really, really large. They're like 12 feet high, so 3 times life scale. Dead Dad happens to be a miniature. It's a 30-inch sculptor. There's one element where they converge and that everything just goes in opposite directions. Neither sculpture is sculpted as a body that would be when dead. The forms of both pieces are full. They're not deflated. When somebody dies, their soul or their energy leaves the body. It deflates. There's no surface tension. The internal pressure disappears and the figure collapses. Both pieces are sculpted in an expanded state with surface tension, and then everything diverges, like I said. And I want to talk about how the energy or the soul is manifested in the gesture and morphology, and how this visual narrative clearly represents an artist's vision of our human existence. Really, this is an argument between sacred and mundane, or the art world and the real world. Let's look at the Michelangelo. Michelangelo's Christ represents us as humanity. Christ really represents mankind. We're all sons and daughters of God traditionally, right? The concept here is that we belong to something bigger than ourselves. Even if we view this figure without the Roman Catholic narrative behind it, there's a sense of peace and serenity, a sense that all is right. This is a sacred view of mankind. In this moment of death, mankind rises to the occasion. No pun intended here. It's more about a state of being. It's rising to the occasion as a human being. I want to go to the detail. If you look, yeah, this is the detail one. Look at the hands of Christ. They hold something. The gesture looks like they hold something of great value. You know, if we go to dead dad's hands, they're just like the body. They just are. They're empty. And let's stay here for a minute on dead dad. The emphasis is on an exact morphology of a unique and specific human being. This figure's alone and boxed in. He's boxed himself in by the hell he's created for himself. It's very no exit, like Sartre and Camus, the French philosophers. Create your own state of mind, which is really, this is the hell you've created yourself. The ambient space that the sculpture reflects is how he relates to his universe. Dead dad looks like he's in a box or a coffin. Modern man's attitude is similar, trapped in a box of his own making. This is a very literal sculpture. It takes away the sacredness of the figure. It eliminates the heroic. This figure's just plopped down on the ground, a victim of his circumstances. His response to death is, we do not hold our destiny in our hands, for you're going to die. Dead dad is naked. He's not nude. The emphasis is on, we do not count. We hold no value, alienated alone, and minuscule in a harsh world. The sculpture is clinical and literal, and there is little separation between the real world and the art world. Does this sound like a rant? Sorry. I'm passionate about this. This is important to me. Muke's piece is about the dark side, the disquieting side of life. The piece is about 30 inches long and lying on the ground, on the floor, so that you could easily trip on him. The physical smallness alludes to the existential smallness, death equal to nothingness. It shows the human body in all its imperfections, frail alone, belonging to nothing larger than itself. Pretty bleak existence that ends with pointlessness, a figure on a mortuary slab. Something to look forward to. Distended stomach, bright red genitals hanging out there at 5 o'clock, the shoulders hunched up around the neck, and the facial expressions say it all. I'm closed. Squeezed, tightly closed. He's closing himself off from the universe. This is a choice. Sculpture relays the message by emphasizing the superficial, the change in skin pigmentation, the skin folds, the body hair. These are all things we see on the surface. The hyper-realism is all about the little details to make it look real and shock you, like a horror movie. It's like sculptural taxidermy. Okay, we need to move on. Literally, we really need to move on. For myself, attitude supersedes the facts. This is stepping outside of the art world. Attitude is everything. The facts are not what everything is. It's your attitude towards life. Sure, we're going to die, but personally, I'm going to go out with a smile. Can you tell I'm biased? Okay, I'm going to go to the Christ one. Christ is not thrown on the ground. He's elevated. Forget that he's Christ. It's an elevated figure. Even if you didn't know anything about Christ, the Virgin Mary, and God, or all the concepts behind it, the figure is shown very differently. In fact, the sculpture is not part of this world, but on a marble pedestal above the mundane ground in one of the most magnificent architectural buildings on earth, in a city whose nickname is the Eternal City. Elevated into the art realm, a world that talks about what can be. He's in the lap of this magnificent female, a figure of God-like grace and physical proportion. He is cared for. Christ is not cast in plastic resin, but rather in a material that glows with light, Carrara marble. Yes, Michelangelo was a sculptor, but his figures are examples of an architect sculpting with organic form. The skeleton is so beautifully exposed. Look at the articulation of the joints, or the rib cage, and how it dictates the torso form, or how the feet and the skull and hands are so graceful. The bones are magnified to emphasize the structure of how beautifully built the figure is. It exemplifies how wondrous the human body really is. That's what my passion is. I take the model and I translate it into sculptural forms using anatomy. And so I elevate it to a higher level than it actually is in the real world. The morphology is very interesting. This is not a weak or wimpy figure. The chest is large, but more than a mass of parts. The forms are sculpted with a perfection in terms of hierarchy of importance and size. It mimics the universe, how all the parts are separate and have the correct hierarchy to the whole. It's how the parts fit together to make the whole that is so spectacularly graceful. The composition of Christ is on a spiral, and each body part faces a different direction, eliminating any sense of rigidity. One of the feet is also lifted off the ground, giving a sense of lightness, and the drapery covers the genitals, giving also a sense of life. And there's a directional pushing and pulling of the drapery on the Virgin Mary, which gives it even more of a sense of life force. How is death exemplified in the morphology? The sternum is collapsed. The sternum is always very important. It's the heart center. It's where we store our energy, right? Sorry. Lacks breath. That's the trick he used. That's the only part of the figure that's really not alive. If you look at the thighs, the abductors, inner thighs, they're full. The chest is full, like I said. And the neck, it bulges in the compression as the head falls back. The arms are also very important. If you see the pronators, they're the muscles on where the joint, where the upper arm and the lower arm come together. Those are full forms. And it's also interesting to note, if you look at the lower legs, those are very thin. And it's an aesthetic look. It gives a sense of he's no longer using his body, he's no longer grounded in this world. He's lifted up and he's moving on to another world, which is a celestial world. So whenever I look at this piece, I'm left with the thought that I'm part of something bigger than myself. And as as a sculptor I am. I come from a long lineage of figurative artists. So how have I reacted to the past, and how do I manifest my philosophy on a human condition in my own work? So I was going to show you very briefly. I've been sculpting for 30 years. And this is what the last piece, the Apollo, this is where I am now. And Peter, if we could go 2 slides forward. This is where I was in '97. And in '97, I was very interested in Michelangelo and the whole concept of creating figures that were very active and passionate. And what has happened is I've metamorphosized into a figure or a body type or morphology and gesture that deals more with possibility. And so I've left behind the concept that we're pressed down by gravity, which is more of a victim role, and I've moved more in an empowerment role. And if we go back to the Apollo, I'll show you the difference. The first one in my studio. Apollo was really conceived with the concept of light being very important. And life is light, luminosity. You must have darkness to have light. But if you look, the sternum or the heart center is the brightest element on this sculpture because those planes are pitched up towards the light. There's a sense of expansion in the figure because I lifted everything compositionally to give a sense of soaring. For example, one of the feet is lifted off the ground. It elongates the thigh, and it gives a sense of moving upwards like the dancing fawn. And the upper hand is an acceptance of the light. This is done from 2 life models, both from Craigslist. And let's go back and look at the other one, and the torso. The next one, Peter. This one, if you look at the sternum, it's downward facing, and the face is also a downward facing look. So this is all cast in shadow. So what I'm doing is I'm manipulating the body parts to catch light or not catch light and be in shadow. And it delivers a message. And so it's a visual message. And the biggest thing that I would like to talk about is I believe art needs to return to an element of being sacred. Right? It's not of this world. It's what we can be. And I'd like to end on that note. So thank you.